Hello everyone and welcome to this leadership forum talking about the move from digital transformation and how we get to the software-defined data center. Indeed, do we, should we, how do we? As you can see, I have a massed array of talent to my left here, representing a broad swathe of the industry. We have a user with us as well, and a selection of vendors, which hopefully will be very good in terms of allowing us to understand what the parameters, what the values, what the challenges, and what we can all expect next. Now, in this particular session, one of the things, people watching will have figured out already is I'm British. I always like to talk about the BBC just for a second. The BBC's remit is to inform, educate, and entertain. We hope to do a little of all of that. We're not going to be doing song and dance, but at the same time, we do think this, occasionally there'll be some levity. So I've also asked all my friends here to chime in. What we don't want to do is go up and down the row all the time, just with a series of questions and little mini lectures. That gets very dull for everyone. So with that, let me introduce myself. My name is Mark Peters. I'm from the Enterprise Strategy Group. I'm a principal analyst there. And that's enough about me because I'm the analyst answering the questions. We are going to go up and down, just a couple of minutes each. And this is where I read, A, so I don't murder the names, and B, some of you have got incredibly complex titles. So let's try and get this right. Okay, here we go. So we have Rupin Mohan. Did I murder your name yet?
No, I think I have probably the simplest Indian name on the planet.
Well, that's good, because yes, you said it, because many people, they're reduced to initials, aren't they? Anyway, so RM, to my left, is Director of R&D, Head of Development and Qualification, Storage Networking, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise.
Yes, thank you.
Now, unlike most of the rest of the representatives here, I think everyone, we're here at HPE Discover.
Absolutely.
Not an unknown entity. But talk a little bit about your role here, how this links with partners, storage networking, why you're on this panel.
Absolutely. So I'm part of storage networking group inside HPE Storage. And, we believe that in a software-defined data center, it becomes a super critical part of the puzzle. It's the foundation of the software-defined data center. And also part of my team is, HP Complete. Storage Networking was the founder of HP Complete, and we have a number of partners on the panel that are part of HP Complete. And so, we are not only working with all the different partners, testing their products, qualifying their products, and also, making sure we are providing the automation and orchestration tools. So from an HP perspective, it's really, really important that when we are launching and partnering with, different partners in the software-defined space, we are coming out with solutions that solve customer problems and give customers a really, really nice experience in making sure that all the products are tested, qualified, and engineered together.
Okay. And I should also say this is the one time I'm going to let everyone talk a little bit about their own companies. They can mention it later, they can use examples, and of course tell us what you have when it's relevant, but don't panic, this is not going to be an hour of pitching. So we now have, let's get it right, we now have Mark Lawrence, who is Business Development, Non-Volatile Memory Solutions Group, Intel.
That's right.
Correct?
We pack a lot into that NSG
Absolutely,
acronym, yeah.
yes. Far away. Everyone's heard of Intel, but again, they might not realize why you would be interested in this sort of endeavor and discussion.
Yeah, we're very interested in it, and I work in our non-volatile memory solutions group, and what we make is the media that goes into Intel Optane memory media, as well as the NAND-based SSDs. So in that storage group, we're very excited about software-defined. It's how you access a lot of this faster storage. Also with Datera, they utilize non-volatile DIMMs, and so Intel Optane memory media can be used in that form factor as well. Also, we wouldn't be here without HPE. They bring this technology to market. We simply manufacture it. So it's a great time to work together with all these great partners.
Okay, and for both of you representing, large organizations, a lot of the conversation already this week has been about consumption and how HPE goes about that. So I'm assuming it's true for both of you that you're interested in partnering to drive consumption. Is that a bit of a softball setup?
Well, HP strategy, as Antonio has very clearly put, is we're going to work for our customers and partners, number one. So number one tenet in HP strategy is to focus on our customers and partners. Number two is innovation, and number three is culture.
Okay, thank you. Mark Fleischman, did I say that nearly right?
That's correct.
Good enough?
Good enough.
We just have to say, at the moment, we're still both Europeans, yeah?
That's right.
Okay, so far.
Yes.
So, CEO of Datera.
former CEO, now co-founder and president of Datera.
Close. I
And,
should have read my
original
sheet,
product
shouldn't I?
architect. Yeah, Datera, we have for the software-defined data center, we have obviously Hewlett-Packard here as a comprehensive systems vendor. We have Intel here as the media and processing provider. We have Mellanox here as a fabric provider for the software-defined data center. Datera, I would say, is the data foundation for the software-defined data center. After all, it all comes down to the data, to what do you do with the data, and orchestrating the data flows, and that's what Datera does. Now, we do it for tier 1 primary workloads. We bring those to the software-defined data center, and we allow them seamlessly automating on the data side.
All right, thank you. Kevin Dealing, again.
How are you?
Close?
Perfect.
Good. Mellanox, fire away.
You got it. So I'm with Mellanox. We are, as Mark said, providing the fabric. So we provide an Ethernet storage fabric. We also provide InfiniBand fabrics. We work very closely with HPE. So they actually, we're a partner with them, both on the NIC side, smart NICs, and the switches that build out that entire end-to-end fabric. We really see what's happening, that it's finally taking off. It's been a lot of talk for a long time that we're going to have software-defined everything. I think now that we have software-defined and hardware accelerated, it's going to become real.
All right, thank you. And as advertised, we have an actual user, KJ Stillebauer. Did I get that?
You got it.
Close, okay.
You
Morae Global.
Yes.
Maybe start with a little bit about the company, because I'm
Yes.
sure some people will not have heard of you, and then a little bit more about your role and what motivated you to sit amongst all these vendors.
Yeah, I thank you for keeping it from being an hour and a half of pitching.
We haven't had an hour and a half yet, so it may all change.
That comes right after.
So Morae Global is a e-discovery and data management and consulting company that helps large corporations and law firms handle their data challenges, from what to preserve and then what to do with it once what they've preserved needs to be handled and manipulated in the context of e-discovery and other engagements. So we are in a sense, a service provider. So we are very focused on being agile to our customers' needs. We find a lot of workloads which one of my engineers calls undocumented and undocumentable workflows, where somebody has come up with a new idea to solve the problem and they need to innovate quickly. So we've been working with Datera of how to speed the time to delivery of our solutions, and we really are excited about that.
Okay, thank you. And your role, just to be clear?
Oh, thank you. I'm Chief Technology and Information Officer.
Oh, both.
Yes.
Again, it's glad I didn't look down at my sheet. I would have got that wrong too. And then we have one of the Tinker twins. Is that correct?
That's right.
Was I allowed to say that live?
Yes,
I don't
you
know. But this is Greg Tinker, who is the CTO of
That's
SereneIT,
right.
I
I'm the
believe.
Chief Technology Officer and President of SereneIT. We call ourselves the next generation VAR. So VAR means value-added reseller, for those that aren't familiar with the acronym. I think most of the audience will be, of course. We have a unique perspective. So my role, previously, for those that don't know, came out of engineering at HP for a better part of 17 years. And so working in the different roles and responsibilities in development of software and patents and publications, I saw a need that a lot of VARs were kind of stuck in a model where they were used to just selling a SKU. And the customers now want more. They want a company that can come and show a solution. So how do we take the best-in-class hardware, the best-in-class software, and come up with a tangible solution that solves a business problem? And there's not too many people that can bring all that to the table today. So with that business problem, I decided to leave my position at HP Engineering and venture off to build an engineering firm to go after and solve that goal.
I love the name. Serene and IT are not usually phrases or words or terms that go together. So.
Most people who know me or my twin brother from the engineering roles know us as smoke jumpers. We've been I've been on every continent in the world, except for 2, Antarctica and one other in there. I'm sure there's one in there. But the point of that story was that we've solved some of the worst problems that exist. I've been in the newspaper multiple times, probably more times than I care to talk about, of bad things happening. And I wanted to focus on a company that makes IT serene to the end user and try to take the pressure off of them. So that's what our objective is, and we leverage basically all the hardware vendors that are up here, the software vendors included, and try to bring that serene experience to our end user. So my perspective on this panel will be probably unique in the sense that we understand what customers really want because we're in charge of delivering on those tasks. Look forward to talking more about it as we go into this panel.
Well, what I'd like to thank you all for the introductions and thank you for sticking to the rule because we're good on time. That's good. I said I'm not going to go up and down all the time. I'm going to start back at the other end because you two had to wait longest and you are a little different because you're not just direct vendors. I shouldn't say just direct vendors, but you know what I mean. It's not a pejorative. KJ, can I start with you? We're going to get into a lot of the more academic discussions about all the things we've touched on already. But I'd just like you to talk from a business, operational, financial sense. What drove you to investigate all this in the first place? And what did you get out of it? And I'll keep coming back to you as this goes on because I think your take on this should be really interesting. And then Mr. Tinker, the same sort of thing because again, you have the pick of all the vendors. So, you know, you tend, I would imagine, to be looking more from the business perspective. Whatever our friends here, of course they're customer focused, but they've got to sell stuff too.
True.
And you have more of a pick. So KJ, starting with you, what got you into all this?
So we've been in the hosting provider game for quite a while and have had the fortune of working with a number of technologies. We've had a number of storage solutions, both those made by HPE and from others. And really where we got ourselves to was a complexity sprawl that was just breaking our business. And it really became about the time to innovation and the time to solution, which existed both from an operations on the business as usual, as well as when things broke. You know, it's often can be a prolonged experience on some of the legacy platforms because of the complexity. So when you're solving a solution that has commodity parts, it's a lot easier to get those parts in the many different jurisdictions that we operate in.
Okay, and we'll come back to what you got as we go through this, but anything to add in terms of, you know, when looking across the breadth of the market, does that sound similar to customers you're meeting all the time?
It does sound similar, and I'll add a little bit, expand on it. So from our perspective, SereneIT is also a hosting company, so we host a large number of private data center solutions for our clients. The problem we ran into, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is the appliances of the marketplace today are great for yesteryear concepts, but for the modern world, it doesn't work anymore. Where a software-defined solution allows us to tear down those barriers, and I'll give some quick examples. We have one client that has a little over 2,000 physical servers on a software ecosystem, leveraging Datera, in fact. And what we're having a pain point is we're having to manage the firmware integration and managing that firmware and doing automation of that firmware role of that entire ecosystem. We can do that now in software-defined world. In the appliance world, we could not.
Right.
And that's a big differentiator. Not only do we have to eat our own dog food on that, in the sense that we host our own facilities and we do the same thing with a software-defined ecosystem, so we can manage the large footprint of servers, storage arrays, switches, Mellanox. We're actually leveraging Ansible and other platforms as well to automate those things at scale. We couldn't do that with appliances. Couldn't do that when I was in the engineering labs at HP. And customers can't do that today either, be it, name your favorite, I won't mention other vendors out there, but what I will say is those appliances models are great, but they lack the ability to integrate into a software-defined ecosystem where we find commodity hardware makes that much easier.
We had that same problem. We had a lot of similar appliances that we needed to scale out those appliances where maybe we had 3 or 4 different appliances of the same kind. And then when it came time to load balance across those appliances, we either had to bring in yet another appliance, which increased our complexity sprawl, or we had to manually manipulate it over the top, which was engineering time.
Manual's my favorite now. That's my favorite. I'm kidding, of course.
You mean manual as in
manual
not
labor.
automatic, or manual as in a book?
Showing
both. My age.
Both. You got to pull out a manual to figure out how to make the appliance do what you want to do. It's miserable.
Neither are good.
Neither.
So the rest of you, just an open question. Are you hearing anything already? I want to get really into some nitty-gritty semantic detail in just a second, but from what we just heard already, does this all resonate? Anything else you want to add to what drives the users you speak to into looking at this sort of implementation?
Yeah, I think it's all about time to value, right? I mean, if we knew exactly what we wanted to run the applications on, exactly how big those were going to be, we could build specific hardware just for that. I mean, we could, between Mellanox, Intel, and HPE, we could build an appliance and have it fit there. We'd actually make a bit more money because you'd be locked in, right? But you can't get the time to value, and you don't know all of those things at the get-go, right?
You either end up, as a customer, you end up buying way more hardware than you need, or you don't have enough on the appliance, so you got to buy more appliances because it won't fit. So we're doing that now with software-defined storage, and on the servers models, like in a software-defined ecosystem like a Datera and a Mellanox, we can build the servers, the controllers we'll call it, the DL380 servers. We can build them as big or as small as we so desire. Right. Where on an appliance, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the key design tenets that we set out on or with when we started DoTERRA. The only constant in IT really is change. And as you have more and more workloads and you sort of bring a cloud operating model to the rest of the world, the change is only accelerating. Yep. And so we build a platform that inherently can adapt to changes very easily, very quickly, and completely automatically. And I think that's one of the key value props that we bring here.
Totally agree.
And I think it's important when we do what's right for the end user. I mentioned, you could lock someone in and make more money for a time, but I think we'd all not meet exactly the requirements that you have, and over time get frustrated, and a new competitor would come onto the market, right? So
it's
we
hard.
Have to do exactly
it takes a long time to build an appliance to meet that objective, and by the time you built the appliance to meet the objective, well, you're already 8 months late.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think what we've seen, even, although it maybe doesn't go exactly to what we expected 10 years ago, is that there's just that much more data out there, and plenty of money for us all to go take advantage of and provide, importantly, a better solution for the end customer.
So, HP, we believe we build, the world's best appliances, as well as the world's best, servers.
Good job for saying that. Good job. Okay.
So, I think HP wins, in both cases because we do have a pretty comprehensive portfolio. And so from a customer perspective, what I feel that customers are looking at software-defined storage, there's customers who are like moving from the cloud back to private cloud, or those are the type of customers looking at software-defined because they're more DevOps based. They want more APIs, right? Yep. They want the time to market to deploy the applications. Really shorten. So I think the software-defined storage kind of plays really well for that type of a customer. Because, moving into the cloud is easy. Moving out is hard. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's 9 times more expensive to move the data out of the cloud than to move in.
I'll take your word for it.
So
I believe it. I'll take your word.
Please. So, I think that, customers are really looking at data, and data is where the value is, and they want to own that data on-prem, and software-defined storage really plays nicely in that for that type of a customer.
I think it's the key thing to note, and I'll mention this right quick, is the fact that the appliances have their place. They're not going away. Customers come of all sizes, small, medium, and large. We always use the terminology small, medium business, and then you get the enterprise or medium enterprise models. It's not so easy as said as that. It's more about sometimes an appliance like a Nimble will work perfect for a given workload, and that's all you need. No anything else to it. No fuss, no muss, right? But in larger enterprises, I find that in the bigger enterprise environments, the customers are always very changing. The ecosystem is constantly moving. So a software-defined model works better in those larger enterprises. Small businesses tend to appliance does the job. So it varies.
To the point around being able to build an appliance that you could get a lock-in, you'd have a hardware lock-in, but as a customer, we don't have a software lock-in. We run the best platforms that meet our business needs. And as soon as that's no longer the right platform, or if there's another platform we've got to layer over the top of it or whatever, we've got to be able to move. And at some point, somebody will come along and break that hardware lock-in, and we're gonna leverage Datera to do that.
I mean, just one quick point. I mean, when we're looking at designing solutions, we are not looking at hardware lock-in. How do we lock in our customers? That's not our design strategy. Okay, our strategy is to make sure that we have a customer who's happy. Mm-hmm. And what is customers? Customers are looking at their workloads, and our strategy is to make sure that customers have the right solution for the right workload. That's the angle where we are coming from.
Mm-hmm. I was just interested, is it, oh, sorry, Kevin, go on.
I was just going to say, what I'm hearing here is flexibility and scalability
Yeah.
across multiple axes. And if you get that appliance, you're kind of constrained. Here's what you get. You get a fixed, set of resources. So being able to scale independently, whether it's compute, storage, networking, that's what software-defined gives you, is all of that flexibility to scale the same way the cloud guys do. And now you can do that on-prem.
I want to
I
come
would,
back.
if I may, I
go
would
on.
argue on top
I told
of
you you
this
could also talk when you want to. Please do. Yeah.
Datera solved the hardest problem because data has gravity, right? Compute, network, and don't have gravity. Data has gravity. And so actually orchestrating, automating data across the data center or multiple data centers like Datera does it, is the hardest problem in the entire stack. And I would say, especially for tier 1 primary workloads, we solved that problem very well as we hear from our customers.
Well, certainly I would agree. I mean, data management as a whole and,
Yeah.
and the extraction of value from data. At the end of the day, for someone like me, I've been around the data business, storage business as it was called for, I don't really like to admit that it's way over 30 years now, but what's fascinating is that early on, the marketing mantra, the internal vendor conversation was always about how data is really the crown jewels and it's important, but no one could really prove it. And at the time, everything else was really complex. So everything else was really hard and no one realized, but we've reached a stage today. I'm not suggesting the other things aren't difficult and engineering challenges, but the only thing that you've got that is of any differentiation of value is data. Everything else is replaceable. Even that application that Fred wrote 50 years ago that no one knows how to do the Perl script is replaceable ultimately. Data is not. Kevin, you led me where I wanted to go next, which is really the this is the academic section of the event here, which is to talk about, it was interesting, if you look at the title of this session, we're talking about data transformation and software-defined in the same breath. Are those two sides of the same coin? Are they different things? Does one have to come first? And what is the meaning of both of them? That should be something you can all answer in about 30 seconds. But whoever wants to go first, we're talking about all this change, the importance of data. I think digital transformation is recognizing that. There is something of a flexibility, to your point, Kevin, in both the digital transformation and in software-defined, we'll say storage for now, but anything. How do these play together? Do they play together? What is the meaning of these?
So I'll start, I think the real
I was
key,
looking at you, so yes, please do.
So I think the real key is, as you said, how do you extract business value out of your data? You can have tons of data, and if you're not actually understanding it, and the businesses that figure that out are the businesses that are going to succeed, because they're going to do better in terms of catering to what their customers want and delivering what they need. And they have to figure that out by mining their data. To do that is extremely complex. It requires compute, it requires networking, it requires data, and really managing all of those things. Can you do that in some other way? Yes, you probably can do that with a engineered system, an appliance. But it's extremely complicated, and those systems are sort of engineered with specific tasks in mind. Very, very well structured databases. Okay, that's what they're really good at. We're talking about unstructured data here, all different formats coming in, it's not clean. And so they're a software-defined approach. So the two aren't necessarily, they don't have to go together, but it's the right decision to make, is to do a software-defined approach where you can scale things independently, you can use DevOps, you can use containers, you can do all sorts of things, you get all of that flexibility because the data that you have is actually kind of chaotic. You have to figure out where all the meaning is inside of it.
And the key here is obviously the scalability, right? As long as you have moderate problems at moderate scale with a moderate amount of data, you're absolutely right. You're probably just fine with an appliance. But at the current speed, at the massive size of data, the massive acceleration in the data center, and the significantly increasing scale, the only answer you ultimately have is software-defined, or we would even maybe say service-defined, the way we actually operate the platform.
That's an interesting distinction. I'm going to keep it for two things just for now.
Please.
But I want to, you just talked about scale, you talked about scale at that end. Just to drill down before I ask the two of you again, because be thinking about your definitions. I understand scale is a key challenge and something that makes things increasingly difficult as you scale. Sorry for the misuse of the same word. Is that the only thing these days, though? Is it also flexibility and just the ability to do different workloads?
I would say that's, a lot of it.
Because when you were talking, I'm sorry to go back a couple of minutes, I remember, when I was younger, but there were differences between, quote, mid-range products and enterprise products. Now the only difference, so I'm sort of agreeing with you that I perceive most of the time, it's not functionality. There used to be things that were only for the big boys and the other stuff was for everyone else. Scale is the difference.
That's it.
But the functionality tends to be everywhere.
And flexibility and speed. I mean, let me just give you an example. We started with physical servers that you set up and maybe ran a database on them. And once you got that configured, maybe you were happy for a couple of years. Then we got virtualization. Now you got, dozens, perhaps hundreds of virtual machines that may not have been, operating for many years. And now we have containers where we have customers that create millions of containers per week, which most of them only have, a lifespan of a couple of minutes. So if you look at that scale and that velocity of a platform, it clearly requires another architecture to deal with than just, again, monolithic existing systems. And that's the big transition we're seeing in the market.
Tojo?
I think it's your point is there's scale in the sense of gigahertz and how many gigabits per second you can push through a switch. That kind of hasn't changed, is changing at a much slower rate. But the velocity of data to adapt your workload to it is still accelerating and is exponentially accelerating. It used to be that you'd call up the ops guys and say, I need a server, and they'll say, okay, I'll have it for you in 6 weeks. And now imagine saying, I'll have it for you in 6 days, and my phone's going to ring of like, what, we're going to lose the client, why can't we do this? We need to have this now. And actually, they don't even want to call up. It's a self-service paradigm where I turn it on, or maybe even an individual isn't even, to your container point, they're not even requesting it. The machine is requesting another machine. And so you can't scale that in a classical platform and have it continue.
And that's ultimately the success of the cloud, right? You go to basically a browser and you have your credit card ready, and within minutes you have your environment set up. That requires a very different underlying infrastructure than, again, traditional appliance-based.
It does. I'll give you two other ones on that one. So you have compliance to deal with at scale. We have a project right now. We're moving a little over 10 petabytes of data from a hardware appliance solution to a software-defined ecosystem. And the problem goes back to, with these new modern compliance regulatory restrictions, HIPAA, don't forget, just know there's a whole bunch of restrictions, right? And so with all this stuff, we've got to keep the data forever, 7 year, 10 year, name your favorite, right? So today, we have to have a solution that can do dedupe, compression, and encryption with a click of a button. It's got to be software-defined and be able to do hundreds of snaps a day. We've got to have all that right there in the ecosystem at a moment's notice. We can do all that with a software-defined model today, where before we couldn't. And that's necessary today. And I'll give you one more example before we switch gears. Is another example where there is a solution where sometimes we do need the legacy footprint. We have 141 million users right now, and one of the largest actual NFS mount points in North America. It's got 141 million users on a 3-par, but it's an appliance, but it's a specific appliance for a specific purpose in life. It doesn't change. It has a given workload, and the compliance and regulatory problems I was talking about a minute ago, it's not an issue here because the lifespan of the data is 30 days, and then it's gone. It's a rolling 30-day history, but it has one purpose-built. So it's not that software-defined is everything. There's both, and that will exist, but there's going to be a reason for it. There's a business justification for it.
Please.
So, that was a great point you made there, Greg. I look at the software-defined from a different angle. And the way I look at it is the next generation of engineers graduating and coming into the industry, I believe are all software-defined. And I'll tell you why. When we were studying engineering and when we were in college, right, we started with assembly programming, right? That was our first programming course, was assembly. But guess what?
This is where we have a vote to see who's smiling.
Well, if you talk to the engineers graduating now, you know what's the first programming language they're doing? It's Python.
Yeah, it is. I just hired a whole bunch.
So we gotta look at it from that perspective. The next generation of IT leadership is going to be software defined. No. So we better have a software-defined mindset going forward.
Yeah. And by the way, absolutely, if you look at millennials and the DevOps culture, they're not going to put up with filing a ticket and waiting 6 weeks
They're
until
not.
they
They're not.
possibly get
They're
a
not.
response. By that time, they're done on it.
Oh, they're going to boil you on LinkedIn.
Exactly. It's just not going to happen. So
Is this
very
where we have the
different mindset.
PSA about how much we love millennials? Because it's so easy to make fun of these
I
people.
love millennials. They can do things
Thank
that
you.
we
There
can
we
do.
go.
You know.
Thank you. Yes, they can. But you see, linking these couple of comments together, I think, well, if you will bear with me, I think is interesting. Is it just the ability to do those things faster and more of them, as you were saying? KJ knows where my question is going because she's shaking her head. Or is it the fact you can do different things? Maybe it's both.
It's interesting you should say that. We've been involved with Datera since before some of the storage technologies they now support were available. And I'm speaking specifically to server class memory.
Yes.
That Optane for you, I'm sure you'll appreciate the plug, but it didn't exist when we got involved with it. It was NVMe, it was others of that type. So the ability for me to then add a layer of servers on the top and essentially without retiring old hardware with a forklift upgrade and being able to say, I need a little bit of a boost here, or I need a big boost in certain cases, but being able to tune my workload as I need it. My use case I know more about than any engineering study group can figure out for my market that would be big enough to build an appliance for. I can have my engineers craft a solution that's going to work for me, and you can craft a solution that's going to work for you. And
It's easier to add a hardware to a software feature set than it is to change an appliance. So there's both workloads that exist. But if you were to ask percentage-wise, where's it going? The industries, I'm going to just make this number up. 70% is going software-defined. 30% will be appliance-based, and the appliance-based will have a core business focus, as the use case I just gave a minute ago. But that's where I see it going anyway. It's my opinion.
Yeah, and to KJ, a key point here of the Datera platform is you can change your mind. You can start with a certain set of requirements for your applications, and if you determine that those are not the right ones, you can add different hardware and you can change the requirements on the fly, right. and the system adapts.
It goes to that mindset with the digital transformation. One of the hallmarks is fail fast, break things, etc. But to be able to experiment at a lower point, instead of having to go out and procure a multi-million-dollar mainframe class storage solution that if you miss, that you might be updating your resume, we call them resume generating events. Yep. But if you can come in and say, okay, I've got three servers that meet the hardware compatibility list. I'm going to install the software and I can prove the concept, and then we can grow from there without having to bring in complete replacement and just start building from there until you get a solution that works for you is really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, you had something. Rupin, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I think that the other thing we're seeing here is there's sort of a virtuous cycle that's going on between software-defined and these hardware accelerations. So you've got things like Optane, which is faster storage.
Hang on, second plug.
Faster storage needs faster networks, okay? And that's where we come in and deliver it. And suddenly now you can have software that's completely automated. So it's not about even manually configuring something and on the fly, virtual machines are moving for load balancing reasons, or you're getting you've run an ad on the Super Bowl, and there's a huge number of people that are hitting your website, and you're spinning up massive number of virtual machines, and you're moving virtual machines from one place to another. Mm-hmm. And because we've got faster storage, now all of a sudden we can access remote storage at huge scale with the kind of speeds and latencies. So there's this beautiful virtuous circle that goes on where faster hardware, faster storage, the software defined, and they're just both reinforcing each other. Things that weren't possible before are now possible.
Yeah, we like the tennis match that goes on between Kevin and I, is that we can optimize what we actually see, trying to get insight from the data as the most important thing, right? Which means you need to get it into the CPU as fast as possible. And so when we bring down latency, to 10 microseconds, and with Datera is extremely low latency as well. We expose some networking latency, then you guys go crazy on the latency for networking, and then we have to go do our jobs again, right? And this is a really fun competition and then also cooperation that we have to do to bring that solution to you all down at the end.
And maybe just in a little bit different words, I love this point. The more you take friction out of the underlying hardware, the infrastructure, the more the management of it and the dynamic composability of it become really, really valuable. And that's why I think we're now seeing the SDDC, the Software-Defined Data Center, becoming successful after it took some while.
It took a while, yeah. And then, not only that, as the application gets better, meaning the software-defined storage, in this case, Datera, and the hardware is continue to get better, the switching and stuff, we find ourselves automating things that weren't possible years ago. Now, we're working on right now, literally, as we speak, we're automating throwing another server in bare metal and literally adding it automatically right into a Datera cluster. Things that, this is what the next generation VARs are doing now. That's what we're focused on, working with HP on and others, is making those the new focus, is making it easier to add hardware so that you can add it or decommission it on the fly.
Where again, what's interesting, sorry to interrupt, you're talking about being able to do stuff that couldn't be done before,
right.
Both at speed and also, and at scale, but just simply new and different.
Yeah.
And one of the things, we do a lot of research at ESG, as many of you know, and each year we have our thing called an IT spending intentions. And one of the things there, just looking at budgets, what's fascinating to me, and this is good news for our hardware folks out there. Well, all folks really who are selling
We do
things.
a lot of software too, by the way.
Well, yeah. I would tap other people on the shoulder, but you're not near enough. It would look weird. No, what's fascinating, if you look at people who attest, end users who attest to have mature digital transformation initiatives in place, the extent, the growth of their budgets is nearly 3 times higher, IT budgets, than it is at people who aren't doing anything about this. So very often these changes, I think, are looked at as just ways to cut more money or be more efficient or whatever. But here, that efficiency, I think, is true, but it's business efficiency at the end of the day, because you can do more stuff, different stuff, better stuff.
Create new lines of business that were not even thought of.
And that's really interesting. So this actually drives innovation and investment. Don't know if you've seen that, KJ.
It's 100% true. It's
Ooh,
a lot
good.
easier. It's a lot easier to go to the CEO or the board and say, I need X, if you can reliably prove that the return on X is 3 and 4 and 5 times what it was, and it's faster. Whereas in the old method, it was more expensive per transaction and it was less predictable. So by transforming your operations, it's a lot easier to put in the telemetry to measure the time to value. It's a lot easier to prove out, this project was successful, this project consumed A, B, and C, therefore, whether it's chargeback, whether it's showback, or whether it's just the defensibility of your budget. Those are all accounting decisions that each customer's got to make. But we are a data-driven business, and if you're asking for something, you need to have data to show where the business case is, where the market is, and what you're going to do with it.
So Datera takes a lot of risk out of your data infrastructure and really makes it more future-proof, it sounds like you could say.
It does so from the hardware, as we talked about, being able, today's A tier is tomorrow's B tier. At some point there'll be something faster than Optane as the tennis match continues, and we can layer that over the top, and maybe at some point the spinning disk will fall out the bottom. But today we just have the ability to keep adding more on top and not having to retire those investments.
When someone says tape forever, I'm just kidding. I am not a tape fan.
That's so unfair, because I was.
Oh, yeah.
You didn't know that, and you can't get that out of your blood. I'm sorry, but it's completely thrown me now, because it's back to my first love.
The headlines of its demise were drastically.
Oh, seriously. I was actually at an event once, just for a second, where someone from a tape organization was saying they'd received a call from some millennials, of all things. Who was talking millennials? Anyway, and they were, I don't know what they'd seen, but they were wondering whether digital tape could be used for storage. Takes a second to sink in. Now, one of the things I was going to say, this is a little glib, but hopefully this will, and it leads to my next question. I often use the phrasing that, in general, what's going on in the industry is we're moving from IT to IT, at which point everyone thinks I've gone crazy because I've repeated myself, which is quite likely. But what I mean is that with some of the changes we're talking about here, whether it's software-defined data centers, whether it's digital transformation, we're enabling ourselves to get back to what IT stood for, information technology, and away from what it has had to stand for the last 20 or 30 years, maybe until recently, which was infrastructure technology, because that was really what constrained everything. Am I crazy? Do you agree with this? Is that a fair way to look at things?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you look at today, most of the systems that we're building, we're using open platforms, we're working closely with partners, whether it's Datera or HPE, but they're automated. Okay, one of the things I loved is we containerized our Ethernet switch fabric so that HPE could put all of their automation software for storage right on top of it. So everything just worked, it just came up, there is no fiber channel in the cloud anymore. So customers that want Ethernet just got it, and it's a beautiful thing. And so suddenly you're not focused anymore on being an expert on the infrastructure. The infrastructure is taking care of itself. The virtualization piece, all of this data that you can take care of now and manage. Data management is a huge piece. All of that automation now lets you focus on the data and the value that's in the data, not trying to build out the infrastructure. All of that is being automated now, so it's really great.
Well, let me go
on.
If
you look at one of the leaders in this in cloud technology, Google, what is the key thing that strikes you when you look at pictures of a Google data center? There's no one in them ever, because it's completely automated. And that's the landslide that we're seeing.
And that leads me nicely, thank you. What a great setup. One of the key questions I wanted us all to address today is what's changed? I'm so tempted to make a crappy little joke now about when I first met Mark, he had a mohawk. But in all seriousness, the concepts that we're talking about here of software-defined have been around for a long time. You could argue they've been adopted, gained great traction in other areas of the market. Servers being one, virtualization. What has changed? Is it user demands? Is there some point of technology? Is it just a realization that this is a good way to go? What shifted?
World's faster. People want more quicker answers.
So is that demand?
It's demand. It's not only demand, but it's demand that they have the data sooner, not later. We spend a lot of our time debugging performance problems, and so when we talk about performance problem, we're talking InfiniBand networks, 100 gig Ethernets, and we still laugh at the fact that we still debug performance problems. So one of the big things talking about software defined that's really helping us out is, and I'll give you a plug to HP on this one, is the InfoSight technology, is the fact that being able to isolate a performance problem quickly solves when's the last time you put up a phone and got aggravated that your email didn't download fast enough? Well, that's an AT&T core network. I can tell you the actual network, we work with those guys on doing that major grid and the hotspots on that grid. And being able to isolate that quickly is becoming a more and more critical nature. Go to a ball game, right, with your kids, and you pull up a Wi-Fi, you're trying to stream something. Myself, I'm using Game Changer. I coach Little League. And it's annoying when Game Changer doesn't even work because we can't see what our kids are doing. We've all kind of gotten acclimated to being faster, need the data instantly.
I think it's not that the world has gotten faster because we've allowed it to get faster. I don't think the world is. I think the world still thinks that IT systems are too slow.
True.
That's
true.
The thing I think is that a lot of this cloud as a destination push has had the side effect of people realizing the business model that actually exists, which is really where the power is.
Yeah.
It's not
the cloud business model, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a destination of, oh, now I've gotten to the cloud and now my VMs smell better and the data tastes better or whatever it is. At the end of the day, it's abstracting, having to work with it.
It's a dashboard.
And having the metrics and having the automation and having the self-service. And being able to circulate that back when the economics of it became distracting and disabling for your business. So when you bring them back full circle and you have to take some of those tier one workloads that didn't work when you tried to push them into the cloud, you're not going to give up on that business model. That's where the innovation of the last 4 or 5 years has really been driven from the cloud back to the prem.
I think the cloud made a change. I think the cloud is the reason why customers are looking for new experiences because they've tasted that experience. And what are customers looking for? Outcomes, time to value, right? And cloud gave them the tool set to do that really, really quickly. So now we got to make sure that we have IT, and we have hardware that we're building that gives customers cloud-like experience. And I guarantee you, 5 years from now, there will be no delta between the experience you get from the cloud versus the experience you get by putting something on-prem.
Cloud management platforms is what it's called, and giving that cloud management platform look and feel of going to an Azure or an AWS and clicking a button and having a SQL server up in 2 minutes, having that in your own data center is where we're heading.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that, we supply to those big guys, to the big cloud guys as well, and they take things that are sort of open platforms and they developed all the software themselves. And it simply wasn't available to third parties, and that is changing. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's taken us a while, but now you have open platforms. We have lots of different partners that we can layer on top of these platforms, all the software-defined infrastructure. Right. A lot of it is stuff that the hardware vendors are developing, so working with the HPEs and the Dateras of the world, and the Intels of the world, we're building that up with NVMe open fabrics for storage. All of that's happening, and suddenly now you're starting to see that in the enterprise environment, that you can get the same flexibility, agility, and that cloud management platform that was only available when the big guys were developing it themselves. So now it's available.
It's a kind of a perfect storm coming from both sides, right? Both on the demand side, where people are just not willing to put up with the old experience anymore, where the word is no, or it takes 3 months or whatever.
Yeah, don't want it.
They want it now, they want it instantly, and they want it as a service. And on the other hand, the technology is now maturing to a level in terms of both the devices, the platforms, the networks, the entire stack, where it's actually possible, just as you say, to bring it out of thought leaders like the original hyperscalers and really bring it to the broader market. So
exactly. Bring it to the masses.
Both the supply and demand really is creating a perfect storm.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I think it's a testament to just even having this panel together right at this great conference that we also need the ecosystem to work together. Right, the business model has changed, and that's important. And then we all, as different vendors, have to come together and work together. And then it takes some time to develop that technology as well, right? We've been developing Optane technology for something like 10 years. So it does take time as well. But I think everyone working together, understanding, where we're having to pivot and then coming together as a team for that.
Yeah, and all that software, runs on hardware.
And you don't mind that. Nor does he. When I point, I mean Mark over here. I don't know why I was thinking of this with all the Marks. There's an old British commentator called David Coleman who was, reliably would mince his words and make mistakes. And he once said, and this will make sense in a second, I promise. He once said, watching a game of snooker, pool, type of billiards, whichever is applicable in your countries. And he was saying, for those of you watching in black and white, the blue is just behind the green. And the reason I'm saying this is I was about to say, for those of you watching, not knowing what's going on, that Mark's got a C, this one's got a K and works for Intel, and I'm asking lots of questions, so we've got K. So I don't know why I'm saying all that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about on cloud, which I think is interesting and leads me, I want to come back to a question I asked before, but slightly differently. Again, our research, it's fascinating the extent to which you find people having cloud-first approaches for new applications continues to increase.
Yeah.
The usage of infrastructure as a service continues to go through the roof. It's now 58% of companies say they do it to some degree.
Sure.
But I think the biggest shift has been what you've all been saying. Cloud has held a mirror up to traditional IT. And so it's had to, whether it wanted to or not, it's not really the point, do things differently, do things better. I mean, that seems to be the difference. The other thing which is intriguing is, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said cloud isn't a destination or whatever. I mean, we know it's a consumption model, thank you. It's also not a strategy, because your strategy should be based on workloads and business needs.
Absolutely.
If you're just saying, well, we're just going to the cloud, that's not really probably the smartest way of conducting business. And it's proven by the fact when we look at whatever you like to call it, people use the term cloud repatriation, that sort of terminology. And, many people have bought something back from the cloud. There isn't a lot of research on whether they intended to or not, so we've got to be a bit careful with the data. However, it's far likelier to bring something back from the cloud if you had a very extreme cloud-first, I don't want to say strategy, mindset. Yeah. So the more you rush there, the more likely you are to come back with something. Anyway, the question all that leads me to is coming back to software-defined X. And we had this conversation a few weeks ago. It's like Goldilocks, with the porridge that's too hot, too cold, or just right. Are we early into this? We seem to have been talking about it a long time. Does this panel show that, and what's going on at the event, show that we're finally getting somewhere? I think we're early. Or are we just on the back end of this and capturing what's available?
No, I think we're early, and we're early because of not the technology from a DoTERRA perspective, for example, software-defined storage. software-defined network and software-defined firewalls. Those have been out for a while. What we're early in is the management of this ecosystem to make it a single click of a button. That Azure-like cloud experience. When most people say, I want to go to the cloud, they're not thinking Azure AWS, albeit they may end up going to that, but their thinking is, I want that single dashboard. I want that click of a button. I want that SQL Server like that. They want that experience. Exactly. I want it now.
Yes.
What's changing, and we're in the early adoption of that, is we're doing that now on-prem just as easy as we are off-prem. The term just as easy as we're a little early on that. We're getting.
Hey, no one in IT ever says that. No one on your side of the business. Sorry, I'm going to ignore you, KJ, just for this. The rest of the panel, no one ever says it's hard, it costs too much, and it really doesn't work. Everything's great.
And no one ever believes them when they say it.
But Mark, I would say when we see the momentum now in the industry at large on SDDC, with partners, with our customers, personally, if you look at this Geoffrey Moore crossing the chasm sort of framework, I think we're beyond the early adopters at this point. I think we're right in the middle of crossing the chasm.
I would agree.
That's the feeling I have every year on this.
Anyone disagree? Sorry, KJ. Anyone disagree with that? Are we slap bang in the good meaty path of this?
Or in the tornado?
Yeah.
I think
I think we've reached that sort of critical mass.
Agreed.
Where the theme of a virtuous cycle and thing, we've really gotten to the point where there are now enough customers who see the value to make it worthwhile for the Dateras of the world, and there's enough hardware demand for the Mellanoxes, the Intels, and the HPE and others to come up with solutions that meet that need, which then creates more customers, which creates better solutions, which creates better hardware, which feeds into that cycle. So I think we've crossed the point where it's somebody saying, well, I've got this weird use case and I don't have a budget, so I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to go do this.
Is that you?
No.
Oh.
It's somebody who says, this is where it's going. We're going to be there because those who aren't going to do it are going to be out of business.
Yeah,
and that's where we are.
And that's what we're doing, right? Intel is one of the biggest partners, right? DoTERRA is our #1 block storage software-defined partners, part of HP Complete. Mellanox, we launched M series, right? M series switches with Mellanox. We're partnering very, very closely with them. We partner with the Thinker Twins all the time. We're working on a couple of huge POCs with DoTERRA, Mellanox. I mean, so that's what HP is all about, right? We are partnering. We love to partner. We love customers, and we're going to build the infrastructure for the next generation software-defined data center.
I think the other thing that's happened is there's a business imperative that's driving all of this, because in the old days you could actually run a workload on a server and it was very compute centric, but today the cloud hit it first. The guys that were the big guys that had massive data sets, they weren't thinking about individual boxes. They were actually thinking at the data center level because that's how they had to think. And so today we're optimizing across the entire stack. So we're optimizing across storage, networking, and compute. We're doing data center level computing. And when you do that, then suddenly it has to be software defined. You have to have interactions and APIs. You can't sit there and have these isolated silos. So that's really the imperative, because as people are moving where they're trying to derive business value from their data, they're using AI, they're starting to delve into machine learning. That's where the growth is. That's where the future is. That's the digital transformation that's going on. Now you're really optimizing across the entire data center stack.
It's allowing customers to focus more on their business, more on their data. Because as we keep talking about data intelligence and AI and looking at the data, making intangible decisions, most of us don't work with the customers in data. We don't dive into their data we don't have the data scientists to sit there and ask the question to figure out how to grow their business. What our objective is to give them an ecosystem that allows them to focus on that and not worry about, it's going to take me 9 months to get the data I want out of it. They don't want that. 4 hours, that's too long. 4 minutes is what we want.
So they can focus on creating business value.
Yeah,
exactly. Their scientists need to be focused on that, not running the server and saying, my CPUs are buried, or I need to add another server, let me go figure that out. They don't want to do that.
No customers ever come to me and ask for a SQL server. They ask for a business result. They say, I have this problem, please solve it, whatever that business case may be. And so we have to solve that problem. It doesn't matter whether it's done in SQL Server or Hadoop or pick your technology. they want the result. And
Right.
by getting there faster with the various tools that we have available to us, that's what it's about.
I'll give you one quick example on that too. It's the fact that we got one customer right now where we actually no more backups. We can't back up 9 petabytes in enough time so that, 24 hours, well, we're still running the backup, sorry. Don't run any new data.
More
Can't do
tape
that
is
anymore.
what you need, more tape.
Exactly, more tape. So we can't do that anymore. So the ecosystem has really changed. And now literally we're able to provide customers software-defined solutions that can go massive scale. On one of ours is like 30,000 NFS mount points with billions of files on 10 plus petabytes. You can't back that up. You got to be able to have a software ecosystem that can snap it and throw it somewhere. Because we do have to worry about the business, right? We got to be able to handle an outage. The customers didn't come to me and say, how am I going to back it up? They say, I need my business protected. We have to, as the technologists, be able to give them a solution that they don't have to worry about, how am I going to run that tape back up tonight?
It's actually refreshing, not just what you said, but if you take that as a whole from comments you've all made, it's taken a while for the industry and vendors to get there, but if you're actually talking about customer issues, because, I've done this a long time, and the number of times I'll sit with a vendor, hardware, software, doesn't matter, and they'll talk about, can you have a software widget? I'm sure you can. But, they'll talk about some new widget they've got,
Sure.
and they'll try to convince me that it's a great thing. And I'm always saying to them, imagine yourself in front of the mirror shaving in the morning, or putting your makeup on, depending on trying to be politically balanced. But no one looks in the mirror, to your point, KJ, and says, I need that new widget. People are thinking about something else. They're thinking about what that widget might do. If they knew about that widget, what it might do for them. That's really important.
It's the IT to IT problem.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I just
Mark
want
with a
to...
K.
Mark with a K, yeah. I want to just address, we talked about getting value out of all of the data that's out there, right? And we just talked about hardware for a little bit, as a couple of hardware providers. You can do so much with software, and we need a company like Datera to access unique things. So we want to build, specifically storage that has different tiers of performance, right? And if we talk about commoditizing hardware, right? If we do that too much, we also can't give that customer value, right? Because if we had commodity medicine, for example, across the board, no one would invent anything new, right? There would be no money for it. So we can't fully commoditize everything, but you can utilize this amazing breadth of technology that's out there and have different types of technology to meet different needs. So Optane on a very high performance side, but also the storage industry is driving to QLC, right, for very, very low cost NVMe SSDs, right? So we need to do both, and we can't fully commoditize everything, right? If we do that, then we can't invent that new technology either. Did I stumble?
No, you said, I think it's sinking in. Thank you. What I wanted to go to next is just to drill down to something else. Maybe my friends on the end first, but then I would like all your comments. There's sort of 2 or 3 parts to my thoughts. So, KJ, I'd be interested to know to what extent you embraced software-defined when you went into it. And what I'm thinking is a couple of strands of thought. Number one is it's great when you have something that's high-performing, flexible, allows you to do things you couldn't do or allows them to do better. But if you've still got other stuff running as well, really all you've added is complexity. You've added something easy, but it's more, doesn't matter how easy it is, it's something else to do. And again, because I want to occasionally quote our research, because you're all plugging your stuff, so I'll plug mine too. But in our latest research this year, 66% of people, which would be approximately 2/3, say that IT is more complex than it was. These are, people who do IT, that it's more complex than it was 2 years ago. I don't know if you'd fall into that camp. Maybe you're in the 34% because you've done something about it. But what I'm trying to get to boil all those thoughts down to, do we have to add complexity before we get rid of it? Once we become fully software-defined, I assume life is a little easier. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I think it's a very interesting point because not all complexity exists in the same place. We've just undergone a major transformation project to simplify our compute and tier 1 storage, but we've had to continue with our second tier storage complexity and our network complexity and a lot of our application complexity. So it's not as simple as throwing a switch and now all of a sudden everything is software defined and you're done. I think it really is because you can't just unload the ship and put it on a new ship and then take off. You've got to keep going through. So you're rebuilding it. Maybe an airplane metaphor is better to one of my CEO's favorite ones, which is you've got to rebuild the airplane in midair. And doing that is a very difficult task. It has some high risk if you don't know what you're doing. But to do that, you're going to have to continue with some complexity that you can't necessarily yet address, either because the technology's not there yet, or your business isn't ready to adopt the workflows. So we've done a lot to work on this because we see the tier 1 workloads as being where our biggest return on investment was. But we'll continue moving that through our strategy. So I would probably put us in the 2/3 where we're seeing increased complexity. But that's where when we said this is what we've got to do, is we got to stem the tide where I think a lot of people would say it's 60% more complex than it was, or 30, whatever that growth rate is. I think we're slowing the growth rate down.
And I'm coming to you, Mark, with a C, but just to say that's an interesting answer to me because, complexity may not be bad if you can, to some degree, at least get your arms around it. That's what you're doing. It's for a reason.
If your business is more
producing
complex, having your systems that support your business be more complex is
Isn't
okay.
bad. Yeah, sure.
But if your systems are more complex simply because of the natural evolution of things, because you're swapping, one old storage platform for the same old storage platform, then you're actually increasing your technical debt and creating a bigger problem down the road.
Go the way of the dodo bird eventually.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, no, I very much in the same way. And complexity by itself isn't so bad. Complicatedness is bad, right? But as the world continues to accelerate, as IT continues to accelerate, as innovation cycles become shorter and shorter, clearly IT itself becomes more challenging and more complex to deal with. And personally, and again, this is why the cloud probably is becoming so successful, or the software-defined data center is really starting to take off now. We're at a point where you need to rethink how you do IT based on first principles, because the old way just doesn't work anymore, at least starting from a certain scale. I think that's what we're seeing. And people who make that transition to the SDDC, to software-defined, to service-defined, to as-a-service, they can deal with this complexity. They can deal with the risk. They can deal with the uncertainty. They can deal with the scale, the velocity. Folks who haven't made the jump yet, they're in a lot of pain. That's absolutely true.
That's true.
What are those first principles?
The first principles are to change the model of IT from a system-defined model to a service-defined or a software-defined model, which really flips IT upside down from focusing on the hardware itself and having people running around with screwdrivers and trying to keep the hardware running all the time, to simply defining your application requirements for networks, for compute or for storage, which again is the hardest part of all of them, and then have the infrastructure figure out how to implement those requirements and change those requirements and keep meeting those requirements at scale, which is a very difficult thing from a product perspective to implement. But again, as we've seen in the hyperscalers that got it working first, and now as we're seeing it in more and more software pieces of the software stack that become online and available more broadly, it's extremely powerful. So those first principles, rethinking IT from the ground up to flip it upside down from system-defined to software or service-defined, that's kind of the transition we're seeing right now.
So I'll give you a good example of that. So that's the reason why SereneIT came to fruition, was because that next generation model, we're an engineering firm first to be able to help our customers adopt that. If you ask me the question, is it more complex? Yes, hands down. At least I'd say closer to 80% if you're a software-defined ecosystem. The objective is to make it easy for the end user. But if you have to debug it, you have to have some wherewithal to go in there and debug it. Where if you wind the clock back 10 years ago and you just have a bare metal box, anybody that's playing around in a college dormitory can boot that thing up, just being honest. And a lot of us came out of that world. But so I say that because, well, you give a good example of that. Pop the hood on your Tesla. Anybody work on that thing? I have my car is a combustible engine, but I pop the hood on it. It's got more computer components. I just shut the hood. You call up a tow truck, come get it.
Sure.
Because it's more complex. It's not like it was on my, growing up on a cattle farm, right? You get a 72 Chevy, 3-speed on the column. That's pretty easy to work on. That doesn't exist anymore in the IT world. So when you talk about complexity, yes, IT is more complex, that doesn't mean it's bad. It means it's making it easier for the consumers.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian position here and say that it is more complex, and some of that complexity has been introduced by some vendors that are actually happy about it, okay? And they're taking that SDN vision and they're distorting it. I like Mark's vision, which is you're not focused on the infrastructure. You're looking at a service architecture and coming at it from a software approach. Some people are out there saying that the original notion of software-defined networking, for example, was to have this centralized control, that we're going to get rid of all of the routing protocols that we developed over the last 30 years. Now, it turned out that didn't work. Okay, the guys that actually were trying to do that abandoned it. Now, parts of network virtualization survived. There's some really good things, overlay networks and things like that. But there are still people out there that are pushing these giant controllers. And if you contrast that with the hyperscale guys, on one side you've got people that are selling enterprise switches with this giant complex stack. And then when we look at what the hyperscale guy is doing, their stack is tiny. Their stack is really tiny. And what they've actually developed is all of their telemetry to know what's going on in their system so that they can automate everything. So there's this weird thing that's going on that they're introducing telemetry or complexity into the enterprise, and they're the traditional embedded guys that have that market today. And they're just trying to lock you in with complexity. And they will have services that they'll sell you to tell you what's going on. And then at the other end, we have these really simple stacks and then a ton of telemetry. So I think eventually the market is going to shift. I think people are going to figure out, I don't want this complexity. It sounded very nice, but you know, that was that resume generating moment when you figure out, you know, I shouldn't have bought that $100,000 network controller because it's just not working, it's not scaling. I want something nice and simple.
You got a deal.
You know, the old going using the car analogy as well, you know, when they lift the hood and it's like...
Yeah, shed it quickly.
No, but there is a comparison there, or an equivalent, because what you're basically saying is, if you had a sheet of paper, you wouldn't build IT like we built it. But I think many times it wasn't that people had a choice. I mean, there were limitations of whether it was networking or compute power, which meant you had to separate into these different buckets to get different jobs done, or nothing would happen.
And again, both on the supply and demand side, the supply wasn't there in terms of technology wasn't there. We didn't have Optane.
Right.
We didn't have a service that you could extremely well automate. We didn't have, reconfigurable composable fabrics. And on the demand side, the velocity, scale, and size of IT just a couple of years ago, was significantly smaller. The number of end devices, if you simply look at that as a driver for IT, we went from many folks on one computer to now a dozen computers, per person. Simply the sheer amount of connected devices, of connected computers exploding. Yeah. That alone is driving, the speed and velocity and size of those data centers.
Right.
I'd be interested to see your research in not just in terms of raw complexity, but complexity per unit of whatever it is, business value or whatever. As the business becomes more dependent upon the technology, the technology will be more, so there will be a higher propensity for things to be interacting and therefore more complex by definition. But if you're 30% more complex and twice the component of the business, are you more complex or are you less?
Yeah. And the only thing I've got top ahead is that one I was saying earlier, which I think is interesting. People who are going through digital transformation, one of our topics, actually spend more money. Now, the nature of things right now, since there is not just one, you can't just buy one vanilla blob of IT and buy as much of it as you like, much as we might like that. So you probably are gaining complexity as well, but you're clearly gaining business value, or you wouldn't invest more. We have only a few minutes left, so thank you. By the way, I'm thrilled to have so many different people on a panel. It's not the norm, so congrats to everyone involved from that perspective. I want to sort of close almost the reverse of where we started. So KJ, I'm going to come to you first in a second and just say, so you talked about how you got into what you did. I'd love you to give us a couple of minutes on what it has achieved for you, whether that has been good from an IT perspective, a financial perspective, operations and business perspective. And then I'm really going to give each of you a minute. So we went up that way first time. We'll come back down this way this time. Just a minute of where you think we're going next, key takeaways for particularly users who have not yet made the leap mentally. So KJ, what have you got out of adopting this software-defined approach?
Well, it ultimately comes down to profitability and value for our business. We saw our cost per unit go down substantially. We also were able to improve the number of critical job runs we could complete in a period of time more than 2x, and we could do that on less hardware with subsequently less licensing. So all of those things collectively improved our efficiency as a business, which is really where, when you talk about being able to transform the way IT is able to go and then get more resources and be a better facilitator for the business, it's given us speed to operations, which has improved our credibility, as well as ultimately just driven better financial outcomes. So we could talk about, well, I got this many IOPS or this many gigabits of throughput, but every app is different, and it's probably the worst spec in the world for any storage vendor is IOPS, because they're not created equally. What really matters to me is I drop my costs, I improve my performance, and I improve my speed to deliver result.
Tinker number one. Final closing thoughts.
So
30, 45 seconds. Don't
30
have to do a
seconds,
survey.
easy, straightforward. From my perspective as that next generation VAR, it's going to be very critical for my competition, that is other VARs out there. They're going to have to be more focused on becoming more of an engineering next generation model to be able to understand the business and understand the best of the hardware, the best of the software, the networking, the software-defined ecosystem, to be able to understand a customer's pain point and be able to make sure that you put the right solution together to get the business outcome. Otherwise, you're going to push a SKU, it's going to upset the customer, it's going to make the hardware, software vendors look bad, and everybody fails. And then that's that resume generating event we talked about. So I think that's the big thing from my perspective.
KJ, although you probably said your piece, but I assume you would encourage everyone else to take a look.
Yeah.
Thank you for brevity. Right, Kevin.
So what I'll note is that we're going to continue to drive the networking speeds. So we're at 100, we're going to go to 400 gig, and that's not happening anymore inside of the server. The CPU is still growing, but it's slowing down. Moore's law is ending. And so this has profound effects, and you start to think about what that means. The data is growing exponentially. The networking is still growing very rapidly. And so we like to say, think outside the computer. It's not just going to be focused on the box. You really have to optimize across the entire data center stack in order to generate business value and accomplish this digital transformation. So you have to think about the storage, the networking, and a whole cluster of computers. It's not one little box anymore that you're running an application on. You have to optimize across that. That also includes software, and you also have to think about security, because as we move to a software-defined everything, unfortunately, the other part of software is viruses and attacks, etc. So you need to start taking that into consideration too, and have hardware and software work together to prevent it.
Hold that thought. Mark.
Yeah, if I take a step back and reminisce a bit on the journey we had, we are now about 6 years old. It's quite amazing. About just 2 or 3 years ago, when we talked about a cloud operating model or a service-defined architecture or even software-defined, very few people understood what we were actually talking about. I think a big change in the industry probably happened with Kubernetes, if I may be technical for a moment, because at least people by that concretely understood what cloud, what this kind of style of infrastructure meant. But if I just now leap forward, the progress we've made over the last 2 years, I would actually say we are now in the tornado on our layer at least. The resonance we're now finding with partners like HP, with partners like Intel, Mellanox, the resonance we're getting with customers. Again, 1 or 2 years ago, a lot of them, it was unthinkable that they would, for high-end enterprise, tier 1 primary workloads, they would go beyond arrays. Now, many, I'm reluctant to say most, but it almost feels like most big customers we go into there, they say like, we want software defined. Absolutely. That's the only answer that actually gets us technically and business-wise where we need to be in a couple of years. And to me, as a founder of the company, it's obviously super exciting going from people staring at you in disbelief and surprise and wonder, mix of it to going like, yeah, that's where we're going. That's what we want. And that kind of being in that tornado is just really exciting and energizing.
Thank you. Mark, anything to add?
Mark with a C could predict the future, but I never do, and definitely not on camera. So in terms of hardware, I can talk to where we'll go on there. We'll continue to try to keep Moore's Law alive. On the compute side and on the storage side and other adjacencies, we're going into ASICs and new storage devices and all of that. But I think we'll need, in this future, whatever runs on it, however it ends up running, we'll need this ecosystem to go faster and work together really, really well.
Rupin, we're at HPE Discover, so I'll give you the last formal word.
Thank you. We're HPE. We think software-defined is a huge growth opportunity for us. And, we are focused on our customers and their pain points. And, we're going to continue to invest in innovation. We're going to invest in our partners. And we're going to basically, solve the problems to meet our customers' needs.
With that, gentlemen, and everyone watching, thank you very much indeed for all your time. Thank you for spending some time with us. Kevin, you mentioned security, and I should also do a little promo. There will be a companion panel to this where we'll get a little more into the weeds. This one was fully intended to be fairly high level about what's changed in the marketplace. The other one will deal with a little bit more of the hows and what is enabling these changes to take place. But with that, thank you very much.